The crystalline spires of Asteria Station pierced the eternal night of deep space, their iridescent surfaces reflecting the light of distant stars. Within its halls, Nova adjusted her prosthetic interface with practiced precision. As the station's leading quantum mechanics expert, she had earned her place through brilliant innovations, yet remained an outsider among her own people. The Asterians valued their telepathic abilities above all else. Nova's neural patterns had been altered by an early accident, leaving her unable to join the collective consciousness that bound her species together. Her technological achievements meant little in a society where mental connection was everything. The arrival of the first human diplomatic delegation was causing quite a stir. Nova watched from her usual spot in the observation deck as their ship docked, its utilitarian design a stark contrast to Asterian architecture. She hadn't planned to attend the welcome ceremony, but her supervisor had insisted on having their brightest mind present, even if that mind was considered broken. James Richardson stepped onto the station with measured confidence. As Earth's lead diplomatic advisor, he had prepared extensively for this mission. Still, nothing could have truly prepared him for the ethereal beauty of Asteria Station or its inhabitants. The Asterians moved with fluid grace, their silvery skin catching the light like moonbeams on water. Then he saw her, standing apart from the others, her bearing somehow different. Where other Asterians flowed like water, she stood firm like crystal. Their eyes met across the chamber, and James felt something shift in the air between them. Nova looked away first, uncomfortable with the directness of his gaze. Humans were known for their emotional openness, but she hadn't expected such immediate intensity. The welcome ceremony proceeded according to protocol, with the station's council exchanging formal greetings with the Earth delegation. Later, in her laboratory, Nova was surprised to hear the door chime. The humans were supposed to be in diplomatic meetings all day, yet there stood James Richardson, looking somewhat lost but determined. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar warmth. "I was fascinated by the quantum stabilization technology mentioned in the briefing. They said you were the one to talk to." Nova hesitated. Most visitors to her lab came out of obligation, not interest. "You understand quantum mechanics." James smiled, running a hand through his dark hair. "Enough to be dangerous, as we say on Earth. Though I suspect your understanding goes far deeper than mine." For the first time in years, Nova found herself explaining her work to someone who asked genuine questions, who listened not out of duty but curiosity. James followed her explanations with keen interest, occasionally offering perspectives that, while unorthodox, showed real insight. "Your approach to quantum entanglement is unlike anything in our databases," she admitted, surprised by her own openness. "Sometimes being an outsider lets you see things differently," James replied, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. "I imagine you know something about that." Nova stilled, her artificial hand tightening slightly. "What makes you say that?" "The way you observe before speaking. The careful distance you maintain. I recognize it because I've spent my career being the odd one out in diplomatic circles." He smiled again, softer this time. "It's not always a disadvantage, you know." Something in Nova's chest loosened, a tension she hadn't realized she carried. Here was someone who saw her difference not as a flaw, but as a perspective worth understanding. It was a dangerous thought, she knew, dangerous and compelling. As James left her lab that evening, Nova found herself wondering if perhaps the human delegation would bring more changes than anyone had anticipated. She touched her artificial interface, feeling the familiar hum of quantum energy beneath her fingers, and allowed herself to hope. Over the following weeks, Nova found herself spending more time with James than she'd ever spent with anyone. Their conversations flowed easily, ranging from quantum theory to Earth's diverse cultures. In his presence, her usual careful restraint began to soften. One evening, as they walked through the station's botanical gardens, James noticed Nova's prosthetic interface flickering. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Nova instinctively moved to hide the malfunction, then stopped herself. "The neural connection sometimes struggles," she admitted. "The accident that damaged my telepathic abilities also affected my motor control. The interface helps, but it's not perfect." James stepped closer, his presence warm in the garden's artificial twilight. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her interface. Nova hesitated, then nodded. His fingers were gentle as he examined the technology, careful not to disrupt any connections. "The engineering is beautiful," he murmured. "Like everything else about you." Nova's breath caught. Among Asterians, such direct expressions of admiration were considered crude. Yet from James, it felt natural, right? She found herself leaning into his touch, allowing herself to experience the simple pleasure of physical proximity. "You're the first person who's ever asked to look at it," she said softly. "Others just pretend it doesn't exist." James's hand stilled against her interface. "Their loss," he said, voice tight with an emotion Nova couldn't quite identify. "They're missing out on knowing someone extraordinary." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities. Nova felt her pulse quicken, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. This wasn't the precise, measured connection of Asterian telepathy. This was something raw, unpredictable, and thrilling. But their moment was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Council member Zenith appeared around a corner, his silver eyes narrowing at their proximity. James stepped back smoothly, but the damage was done. "Delegate Richardson," Zenith said coldly. "The council requires your presence for an urgent matter." As James was led away, he cast one last look at Nova. In that glance was a promise. This wasn't over. Nova watched him go, knowing that everything had just become more complicated, and finding that she didn't care. That night, she received an official notice. Her lab access was being restricted for security purposes. The message was clear. The council disapproved of her growing closeness to James. But for the first time in her life, Nova felt ready to fight back. The council's disapproval manifested in 1,000 subtle ways. Nova's research funding was delayed. Her quarters were relocated to a distant section of the station. Other scientists who had previously collaborated with her suddenly became unavailable. But James found ways to see her anyway. He arranged impromptu meetings about Earth-Asterian technology exchange that required her expertise. He accidentally encountered her in the less monitored areas of the station. Each stolen moment made the restrictions more bearable. During one such meeting, hidden in an auxiliary engineering bay, Nova finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why risk this? Your mission is too important to jeopardize over." She gestured between them, unable to find the right words. James caught her hand, both organic and prosthetic fingers intertwining with his. "Because some things matter more than politics," he said. "Because when I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally seeing the real Asteria, not just the perfect facade they present." Nova felt heat rise to her cheeks, her skin shimming with emotion she couldn't suppress. "I'm hardly representative of my people," she said bitterly. "No," James agreed, pulling her closer. "You're better. You're real. You've faced rejection and isolation, yet you've never let it break you. Your brilliance, your resilience, your determination to keep pushing forward, that's more beautiful than any telepathic connection." His words broke something open inside her. Nova found herself pressing closer, her free hand curling into the fabric of his uniform. Their faces were inches apart, breath mingling in the recycled station air. "This is forbidden," she whispered, even as she leaned in. "Then let's break the rules," James murmured back, and closed the distance between them. The kiss was everything Nova had never allowed herself to imagine. Warm, intense, and completely outside the bounds of proper Asterian behavior. She felt alive with sensation, every nerve ending singing as James's hands traced the patterns of light along her skin. But their moment of connection was shattered by a station-wide announcement. "Attention all personnel. Due to concerning anomalies in our quantum field generators, all non-essential personnel are ordered to evacuate to safe zones immediately." Nova pulled back, her eyes wide with alarm. "That's impossible. I checked the generators yesterday. They were perfectly stable." James' expression hardened with understanding. "They're making their move." Nova nodded grimly. The council was done with subtle pressure. They were creating a crisis that would require her expertise to resolve, one that would keep her separated from James indefinitely. "I won't let them do this," James said fiercely. "We'll find a way." Nova touched his face gently, memorizing the feel of him. "They won't give us a choice. Unless..." Unless what? A plan was forming in her mind, dangerous and brilliant. "Unless we give them something they want more than they want us apart." James recognized the look in her eyes, the same one she got when solving impossible quantum equations. "Tell me what you need me to do." Nova smiled, her skin glowing with determination. How would Earth feel about exclusive rights to my latest quantum breakthrough? Nova's fingers flew over the quantum interface controls, her prosthetic hand moving in perfect sync with her natural one. The fabricated crisis in the station's generators had given her the perfect cover to implement her plan. James stood guard at the laboratory entrance, monitoring station security feeds on his datapad. "They've noticed," he reported, watching red alerts flash across his screen. "The Council is mobilizing security teams." Nova didn't look up from her work. "Let them come. They won't understand what I'm doing until it's too late." Her interface hummed with energy as she accessed the station's quantum network, not to join it as the Asterians did, but to reshape it. Years of isolation had given her a unique perspective on Asterian technology. Where others saw only the prescribed ways of utilizing quantum energy, she had discovered new possibilities. Her latest breakthrough wasn't just an advancement in quantum mechanics. It was a revolution in how energy could be shared between minds. The laboratory door chimed with an override alert. James tensed, positioning himself between Nova and the entrance. "Whatever you're going to do it fast." Nova initiated the final sequence just as Council member Zenith burst into the lab, flanked by security officers. Their silver eyes widened at the sight of the modified quantum array. "Step away from the controls," Zenith commanded. "You risk everything with this reckless behavior." Nova straightened, her skin glowing with defiance. "No, you risk everything by refusing to see beyond your prejudices." She pressed the final activation sequence. "Now witness what someone like me can achieve." The quantum field pulsed, and suddenly every mind on the station, telepathic or not, could feel it. Not the invasive presence of Asterian collective consciousness, but something new. A bridge between different ways of thinking, of being, of connecting. Through her interface, Nova could sense the astonishment rippling through the station. Asterians experiencing human-style emotional connections for the first time. Humans feeling the subtle harmonies of Asterian thought-sharing. And at the center of it all, her own mind, finally able to touch others in her own unique way. James gasped as the field washed over him. His eyes met Nova's, filled with wonder. "This is how you see the world." She nodded, letting him feel everything. Her lifetime of isolation, her determination to forge her own path, and most importantly, her deep feelings for him. The connection was nothing like traditional Asterian telepathy. It was vibrant, emotional, revolutionary. Zenith staggered, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sensations. "This is impossible." "No," Nova said softly. "This is evolution. A way for different minds to truly understand each other." She turned to face the Council member fully. "And this is just the beginning of what Earth and Asteria could achieve together." The security officers lowered their weapons, caught in the web of shared understanding. Even Zenith's rigid posture began to soften as the implications became clear. Nova's breakthrough wasn't just technological, it was cultural, diplomatic, and deeply personal. James moved to stand beside her, their fingers intertwining. Through their connection, she could feel his pride, his love, and his absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next together. 1 year later, Asteria Station had transformed. The once rigid hierarchy had given way to a more inclusive society, where different forms of connection were celebrated rather than suppressed. Nova's quantum bridge technology had become the foundation for a new era of human-Asterian relations. In her expanded laboratory, Nova watched as a group of human and Asterian scientists worked together, their different approaches to problems creating unexpected innovations. Her own team now included researchers who had once shunned her, each bringing unique perspectives to their shared projects. Still working late, James's voice came from the doorway, warm and familiar. Through their permanent quantum link, she felt his affection wash over her. Nova smiled, her skin shimmering with happiness. "Just finishing up. The latest modifications to the bridge are showing promising results." James crossed the room to wrap his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "The Council approved our proposal, by the way. We'll be opening quantum bridge centers on Earth next month." She leaned back against him, enjoying the dual sensation of physical and quantum connection. "Nervous about returning to Earth?" "A little," he admitted, "but mostly excited to show you my world, the way you've shown me yours." Nova turned in his embrace to face him. "I never thought I'd be allowed to leave the station, let alone as an official ambassador." "Ambassador Nova," James grinned. It suits you. She traced the lines of his face with her prosthetic hand, the interface humming softly. None of this would have happened if you hadn't been stubborn enough to see past my differences. Your differences are what make you extraordinary, he murmured, leaning down to kiss her. Through their connection, she could feel the truth of his words, the depth of his love for every part of her. Later, standing at their favorite spot in the observation deck, they watched the stars together. Earth was out there, waiting with new challenges and opportunities. Nova's quantum bridge technology would change both their worlds, creating connections that had never been possible before. "What are you thinking?" James asked, though he could feel the general shape of her thoughts through their link. Nova smiled, her skin glowing with the soft light of certainty. "I'm thinking that sometimes the things that make us different are exactly what bring us together." She felt his agreement, his love, his excitement for their shared future. As they stood together, watching the endless expanse of space, Nova realized that she had found something far greater than acceptance. She had found a way to turn her unique perspective into a bridge between worlds, and in doing so, had transformed what it meant to belong. The stars stretched out before them, infinite with possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. A living testament to the power of seeing beyond differences to the connections that truly matter.